So you know it's not a crime to be fascinated by all things criminal. And if you do like delving into the underworld, why not join us for a special live show on March 27th at the Cork Opera House. We'll be talking about the making of a cartel and all the wild and crazy stories that happened along the way. So why not join us for this special live show? Tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie.
Interesting story here, and it comes days after the 21st anniversary of the disappearance of Lisa Dorian. A man has been arrested on suspicion of her murder. Now, Lisa Dorian was from Bangor in County Down.
Yes.
She was 25 in February 2005 when she disappeared after attending a party at a caravan park known as Ballyhalbert.
Yeah.
This is essentially a cold case.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And it's been in the news. Like, her family have really tried to keep it in the news for a long, long time. It's kind of, even though it's in the north, it's sort of like, it's one of those names that you would, so obviously there's missing women here who would sort of forever be, the names would be in your memory, but this is also one of those names that would always ring a bell with me.
It's the idea of a young woman at the kind of the cusp of, becoming like she's 25, so she's got her whole life ahead of her. The photographs are of this smiling, happy girl who's out partying and enjoying life, and then they're frozen in time. I think that's why these cases are quite poignant.
Yeah, but I think in this case there was always sort of like I think it was clear from very early on within her family that it was suspicious, but I think there was certain things that it maybe
they felt should have been acted on quicker.
Exactly. And I think they always sort of had I think there was always a person that was suspected of being involved, that this wasn't a random abduction. And I think there was a little bit of that in the background as well. There's people know things and people believed things and who may have been responsible. So there was a lot of that kind of anger about why has this not moved quicker.
And is there a case in this, as in many other cold cases, that people have held secrets over a long period of time and got away with it?
Well, I think so, because there was a woman and a man arrested last month on suspicion of murder and assisting offenders. So they were released on bail pending further inquiries. That's the way the police do it in the north. And then obviously this week there was a 40-year-old man arrested on suspicion of withholding information and assisting offenders. So he wasn't actually arrested in relation to murder. He was arrested in relation to what you just said, having information. And I think that's the whole thing, that there was a party there, and there's a lots of sort of suspicions about what may have gone on, and rumours that something bad happened to her on that night. And I think that is now the theory that Garda.
She would have been 46 now had she lived.
Yeah. I know.
It must be really hard for the families.
I know, because that's the sort, you're still like, and that was 21 years ago. Like,
and speaking of which, what happened? Because I haven't been speaking to you since the searches down here
for Deirdre Dullard and Deirdre Jacob. Yeah, so they ended, and
again,
basically, they ended again. And I think this time is actually because
a search for a car.
Yeah, it was basically that something was seen buried in that quarry. So this quarry was 8 kilometres. It was kind of in between Blessington and Baltinglass, and we know that Larry Murphy lived in Baltinglass back then, so it was about 8 kilometres from there. And there was so basically Deirdre Dullard disappeared in 1995. She was last seen in Moon in Kildare, and Deirdre Jacob was last seen in Newbridge in Kildare 3 years later in 1998. So both of them were both on this, near enough to this area. And I think the theory was it wasn't necessarily that they were looking for boat women in that quarry, but they weren't sure. There was no names mentioned. And I think because they both went missing in that location. Yeah, it was that. So it was a bit confusing, because we had a story about Alan Bailey, who obviously he was involved in Operation Trace, which was set up to investigate the missing women cases back then. And he had said that quarry was mentioned in relation to Deirdre Dullard, that something was seen that night, and that they looked, I don't think they digged, but they looked around. But then this is where the card thing came up, that then apparently it's been reported that in recent times that Larry Murphy was supposed to have been seen bearing a car in that quarry, and that it was, alleged that Deirdre Jacob was in the boot because she went missing a few years later. So it was a little bit confusing about what exactly was there, but this was supposed to be the suspicion that they were looking for like something like a car, and they did find like metal from a car, but they don't seem to have been able to link it to either missing women. So they announced that the dig was ending, but they said that they were continuing to search the area. But I think it was a little bit disappointing because I'm sure the families are used to disappointment, but I think there was actually, this was believed to have maybe there was
the breakthrough finally.
Yeah,
and maybe one day there will. It's just, there's been so many false hopes and starts, and we know even from a media the amount of information, a lot of it, and most of it very well meaning. From people about Larry Murphy. He's this character that has really sort of this sinister individual who's really seeped into the public conscience.
It's like a boogeyman.
He's like a boogeyman. And I even get photographs all the time of people who really genuinely believe they're in a pub in some part of the country and the guy sitting at the bar is Larry Murphy.
And
like you kind of half laugh sometimes when you see this stuff. Is this Larry Murphy? I think he's here. And you're going, no, it's just a red-haired guy.
He doesn't have, he does kind of have a face that would blend in as well. Like he doesn't look extremely some time you see someone and you're like, oh yeah, they do look like, a rapist or a
I just always think of that photograph of when he was sort of sleeping on the train after he had been released from prison, and he had a kind of white hoodie up around his face and his skin looked so white. I mean, that one kind of would...
The one when he got out of prison with the grey hoodie, that was, now he did look a bit dangerous there, but I think that's all. But you're obviously extremely dangerous, but you're looking at it in the light of knowing what he did. But I don't know if you just walked by him on the street and he didn't know any of that. What do you think?
Yes, has he just got one of those faces that blends into a crowd or something?
Slightly, I think. Because he was known for being a creep in pubs and stuff before this, so he obviously would always stand out for that. But I think if you did know him from Adam, I don't know if he's
one of those really dangerous people predators that is able to survive on their own. And that's the thing about him. Like, while you get so many messages, and if there's ever a story about Larry Murphy, no doubt the newsroom is just inundated with people either looking to know, do you know where he is, or I think I might know where he is, whatever. But he is somebody that could be absolutely anywhere. The last place that we know he was in the UK, and at that point there was hope by an investigation team that he could be put on trial for the murder of Deirdre Jacob without the body. Now that never happened. Because that's a very difficult thing to do. You need a huge amount of circumstantial evidence, and in the case of, for example, Sandra Collins in Mayo, who went missing, was never found. There was an individual put on trial for her murder. At the end of 5 weeks of that trial, the trial judge decided there wasn't enough evidence to put before a jury to consider a murder conviction for him, that it wasn't safe, so that it collapsed. And it was because largely there was no body. Now, it has also been cases where there has been convictions without a body. They're rare, but the last time that was kind of, that was near for Murphy, he was in London. He was living in London and he had a new relationship. And he had gone from Amsterdam to Barcelona. He had travelled around. He's a carpenter, a tradesman. He can get work on the boats. He can get work, on building sites. But he had settled himself into London, away from his family, never looked back, and was able to create a new world.
And he had a relationship, and I think, was it that flatmates hers found out about the relationship or something like that? Was a good few years ago.
Flatmates recognised him actually a few years ago, and she was an artist, and she was somebody who was informed who he was. He hadn't been upfront with her at the beginning, but when she did find out, she was quite happy to continue the relationship with him. Now, we don't know whether that's continued or not, but somebody who's able to be taken from everything they know. He was nearly in jail for 15 years. He comes out into a whole new world. He's able to move to different countries where he doesn't have the language. He doesn't know where he's going to start. The social welfare system, everything. I'd find it difficult to do that. Yeah.
That's almost more dangerous in a way, because he's able to function.
Yeah.
That's almost like, psychopathic or something like that.
They don't need people.
Yeah, exactly. And they're obviously highly functioning and able to sort of blend in. And,
exactly.
because you see some repeat offenders who just can't help themselves, whereas he doesn't seem to be,
And I'm saying that because one of these days somebody will send a photograph that won't be just some fellow with red hair
who send them in
enjoying a pint. You know what I mean? One of these days it will be Larry Murphy somewhere that we aren't aware of his presence. And
I suppose he'd have no reason to come back. We don't, I assume he doesn't have anything to do with his family now, so why would you come back? And I'd imagine the guards would be alert.
And if he's going to be recognisable anywhere, it's going to be in Ireland because there's so much publicity around him, and he is still such a, still spoken about. The idea that all these years later somebody could remember that he buried a car in a quarry in the...
Yeah, and then there was a bit of confusion about when that call came in and stuff, and then there's sort of is it just...
It's very difficult as well for the gardaí trying to follow up and know what tip-offs to follow up, because you just can't go out and dig up the whole country.
No, you can't, and I don't think and then there's a certain part, I don't think you can dig up a whole quarry, so they have to know where to go as well. And they had looked at that quarry before, so it's just very.
I was talking to Pat about the tragic story of little Daniel Arbose, is it?
Yeah.
And even when the police were brought to the area of land where he had been buried just 3 years previous, and the woman who brought them couldn't totally identify exactly where he had been buried, and it took 18 days.
That's the thing. But you wouldn't remember, would you? I don't think. It was probably a night time.
It just shows as well. Even if you're shown a field, say the size of this studio or twice the size of this studio, where do you start digging or searching? Or
exactly,
it's so difficult to find a body unless you literally have X marks the spot.
And it took them a couple of weeks to find Daniel, and they were told where, but you probably don't fully remember either. It's nighttime, all those
things. They kept shifting, Pat was saying, different places. The search would be concentrated in one corner of it, in another corner of it, and eventually his little body was found, or his remains were found. That story, again, he had spoken to the mother, Maria, which was extraordinary, even.
It's
what she had said in that short space of time as she waited to step into the taxi, and she's very articulate.
And in fairness to Pat, he that's the first time she's spoken, so it's good to have, because obviously she was arrested in relation to Daniel's death, but she wanted to have her say, so it's I suppose it gives a bit of context in terms of what she said happened, but it's just a very sad story.
Yeah,
when you think of the heart of it.
Now we're going to move on to a guy called Jamie Berry, who's been in the headlines this week.
Yeah,
and this is a very dangerous individual, and he's only 30.
Yeah. I know, and it's really scary. He's been involved in kind of lower level feuding in Dublin for a long time. Ken Foy has written about him a good few times, but basically, he's in jail. He got a jail sentence only a couple of months ago for this really savage incident where basically he almost killed he's 21 now, he was 17 at the time, so he was underage at the time. Now that teenager has gone on to be a criminal in his own right, but we can't name him for legal reasons because he was a minor when this happened. But basically himself and two other guys were involved in this shooting of the teenager, but he managed to survive, and he's this week has been back in court for basically this incident. It was kind of like a south side, north side feud related incident, and it was literally very close to the time that this attempted murder of the teenager took place. So basically it was in the middle of COVID pandemic, and he was armed. It was basically seen as a frenzied kind of incident. I think it happened in November 2020, and he basically happened in the Pierce House complex, and there was just a gang of guys going at each other essentially, and I suppose it's because of those links that there's concerns that when he does eventually get out of prison that he might not be it might be difficult to keep under control basically, and the original instance where the teenager was shot, it's believed that he was actually the gunman, so it's he's a very, very dangerous guy.
And unfortunately, I could guarantee you we'll be hearing about him a lot.
This is the
in the
concern,
future.
I suppose, yeah.
2 stories centred around the police, and maybe we'll start with one which we have in the south. We have a guard has been suspended after allegedly making continuous remarks to a younger female colleague, which have been described as either racist or sexist, depending on which way you interpret it. It says, we have a constant kind of stories of gardaí that are being brought before the courts.
Yeah.
Or really it is sexual misconduct in office and using their positions. And I'm not going to go into details because we would then have to go into the details of the cases and what they have said in their defence. But we all know there's been quite a few of these cases that have come up.
Yeah.
Now, in the north, a pretty shocking report came out this week to show that there have been 60 cases reported to the Police Ombudsman of Northern Ireland since 2018, and they represent police officers who've been accused of abusive position for sexual purposes. And most of these cases are with, victims of domestic abuse and crime.
Yeah.
And the PSNI Chief Constable John Boucher said that any abuse of position for sexual purposes was wholly unacceptable, and he is somebody who's been put into that position and is, he seems to be as open as we've ever seen anybody in that role in the north.
Yeah, which is kind of what you need, isn't it? Like, I think transparency has always been an issue. So
I suppose what you have is a situation in where you have people going into a role where they're in power, even if they're in a low-ranking place.
Yeah.
You're hoping that they're good people, that they're following the rules. There's rules and structures in place, obviously. But victims of crime, and sometimes people who come into contact with police who maybe have committed a crime, can be hugely vulnerable.
Well, this is the thing, and this is the concern, that like this can turn into something very sinister, and that like people can be taken advantage of in those ways. But I think it's always been like, obviously Ireland has a history of abuses of power from the Catholic Church, then from the Scouts and all that kind of thing. We've seen what's happened, and Christian Brother schools and stuff like that. But in terms of the guards, you want to be able to believe that, because they have access to so much information, don't they, the guards? Like they have all your personal information, they have like detailed, intimate details, all that kind of thing. So you have to, and even aside from like inappropriate behaviour, there's also a lot of, pulse data and all that information as well. So you are kind of, trusting in the
and in a way,
establishment.
people are coming to them, say, as victims of crime, they're most vulnerable.
Exactly.
But sometimes also offenders can be in a vulnerable position as well, because they can have done something and it feels like their world is about to collapse, or,
Of course,
look, they have offended as such, which is why they're, until they're found guilty.
Yeah.
But this report is stating that between 2018 and 2024, 6 officers have been sacked or convicted for abusing their role. And most of them are males in age between 30 and 50. And interestingly, the report identified 2 types of offenders. Did you see this? They called them sharks, which were younger officers who tended to make rapid contact.
Yeah.
And then fishermen, they call them, who were more tentative in their approach. So probably slower and maybe a little bit more grooming. They're, trying to feel their way around a situation before they go straight in for it.
Yeah.
Now, there is a lot of this that has been redacted, that hasn't been come out. And I think that my understanding is there's a certain amount of police in the north who believe that this report should be fully thrashed out in public, because what's in it is shocking.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, policing is a funny sort of a place, and I think particularly in the north, we won't pretend to know a huge amount about it, but the RUC existed, the PSNI came in, and there was a kind of an encouragement of Catholics going into the PSNI.
Yeah.
They probably went in and were shunned by their own communities, maybe, in certain cases. I'd say you're very isolated in it.
Mistrust. I suppose there's probably an aura of mistrust
within the community, and do they just mix together, and is there a little bit of that goes on?
Yeah, well, do they hold prejudices there? obviously things are meant to be different now, so you would hope not. But it's it's, as you said, it's a people that come into contact with the gardaí. It's usually they're either victims or they're in a really bad. If you're being accused of something, you're in a really bad way in your life. So you have to be able to put some kind of trust in them. But the figures are very interesting.
Figures, and I'd say there's an awful lot more to that.
Yeah, and there's actually some figures down here as well that we had as part of a different story this week. But there was 101 gardaí suspended across the country as of February 1st this year. So they're currently suspended, and 17 were for alleged sexual misconduct or misconduct. So it's like, there's obviously...
What are the others for?
So it's all different kind of ones, but some of them are
Some of them are suspended because of kind of, maybe firearms, using firearms during...
like some interfering with penalty points notices and stuff like that. There was also 17 for allegedly driving under the influence of an intoxicant, and 10 are suspended for alleged domestic violence or coercive control. We've actually seen a couple of gardaí who've been convicted in relation to those offences as well. But Ken Foy had a good story this week that kind of tied in with that. Basically about a guard in the northeast of the country who was suspended for making an alleged inappropriate remark, and it was considered racist or sexist to a female colleague. He was more of a senior rank than her, and basically, like he said, to really offended her with this remark, and it was other people in the station weren't happy with it either. So he's basically been suspended pending investigations. And there's a guard in the same station also under investigation for alleged inappropriate behaviour, where apparently he was bringing like a female colleague home, and he invited her into his home. I think they were working together basically, and he invited her into her home, and then she was kind of downstairs, and he allegedly arrived down half dressed, and basically tried to make, like, it's alleged he tried to make inappropriate moves there. So it's kind of like, it's interesting that there's two in one station.
I wonder, is it something to do, I'm talking about both the PSNI and the Garda.
Yeah.
Here, on Garda Síochána here. And listen, before I start getting absolutely, my social media jammed, I am talking about the minority here, right? Obviously. Yeah. But I wonder, is there something about, like, we talk about in society, when we have this class system, we're really all just one generation away from poverty. You know what I mean? You talk about middle class and this, that and the other. Yeah. Most of us are.
Yeah.
In the Guards and the PSNI, they're only one generation away from what was such a completely different world, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You look at the Garda Síochána here, the existence of the murder squad, all that went on with all that. But it's like, that's within the lifetime of ourselves. Like, so trying to wash two systems into the modern world, which have been very much in a position of power where there's been a huge amount of corruption in the north, the OUC, it's probably going to take quite a few generations for it to be cleaned out.
Because there's still people in the force, that are still around, that would have been in that culture. And, I think in a lot of workplaces, not even in the Guards,
like our own.
It's a lot more PC now. You have to be very careful what you say. I'm sure we all have stories. You're doing it longer than me about, things that
can we not remember when it was okay to you walk in the door, like newsrooms were rough environments, really rough.
Yeah.
You certainly wouldn't have wanted to even consider that you could have made a complaint about anything.
No.
And you walked in a door and you could have just been absolutely monstered, was the word that used to be, because you hadn't brought back the story, because you just simply couldn't get it.
Exactly,
There was no excuses. It was such a different, the work environment really is what I'm talking about, is so different.
Yeah.
That our expectations are there, and they should be.
Yeah, of course.
All to be cleaned up. But maybe it'll be the next generation that it'll be.
Because it takes a while for it to take effect.
Filter out.
And we have seen that, like, that story, it was only in recent months, of the female Garda who left the force. She was abused by her husband, who was a Garda, and basically she spoke of how it was a Garda boys club and how she was treated after she made the allegation and stuff. So, like, that's still, that's obviously an isolated incident, but there is still some element to that. So,
that's both sides of the border, really. There is an oversight now, and it's collecting those together. I think in a way by the PSNI and hopefully the Garda Síochána, when you collect those figures and those amount of cases that are similar, you're trying to wipe out a culture.
Yeah.
As opposed to taking them in isolation. And you're trying to identify if there still is a culture there where in the PSNI, where there's people abusing their power and making, sexually inappropriate comments or actions to vulnerable victims. And similar in the Garda Síochána, as well as, inappropriate remarks to their colleagues.
Yeah, I suppose it's people have to know that there's trust in the complaints procedure and that they will be believed and that they won't be. I think there's always going to be in every organisation the odd rotten apple. That's just life. But if they know that they're not going to be in any way supported or encouraged with their behaviour and that any allegations will be investigated completely, I think that will help the trust and the confidence.
Trust.
Yeah.
Now, who ordered this one, right? We're going to finish on this, but this story, I do remember this stopping me in my tracks when it was first broke. So it's a Garda detective who was suspended for more than 3 years for giving a man a loan of a bicycle during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
So the bicycle had been left unclaimed in the police station.
Yeah.
And I think this man was a neighbour of the Garda detective.
Yeah.
And he gave him a loan of the bike and said to him, "You're going to have to give it back."
Yeah. And he did say he would give it back. He did tell him he had to give it back after the period where he didn't need it anymore. I think the bike was only worth €50, so it was a very basic bike. But basically,
somebody somewhere ordered that this be investigated, and 6 members of the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation in June of 2020 went in and raided the detective's home.
Yeah, and I think the reason that the reason that was used was because he didn't fill out the correct paperwork. That was the reason given why this investigation was carried out.
But he had informed a superior officer.
He had. So I suppose that that case was, we all remember that case. It was a wild one, but I suppose why it's in the news this week is that he has settled his action against the force for nearly €275,000, so over €250,000. Yeah.
Now, when he would have been suspended, he was on full pay. So this is compensation, really, for his reputation, is it?
Yeah, it's a lawsuit, basically. For damage. Yeah, it's a completely. I think there's a lot of obviously public sympathy towards him because he was doing a nice thing. He was an elderly man, but it is still within your professional career, for that to happen. Of course, you would have a case of reputational damage,
For sure.
Yeah.
This money has been paid out by the state.
Well, that was the settlement.
Settlement.
The settlement. Yeah,
and that includes his legal fees. But is there any more people in the ether there that will be coming forward as well to make a claim in this case? But what I'd like to know is who actually signed that off? Who was sitting? Because it has to be a superior officer that decides this is worth investigating, and I'm going to send 6 detectives from a specialist unit into that house.
I know.
To raid it in front of the neighbours and everybody else. And in his action against the state, he cited 37 grounds for negligence, breach of duty and breach of contract, including failing in its duty of care, that's the state, searching his home and suspending him without any appropriate basis. Now, he said he suffered severe personal injuries and loss and sought damages for a variety of issues, including loss of earnings, medical and travel expenses.
Yes.
Who thought this was a good idea? Because we never see these people remain faceless, don't they?
Yeah, no, they do. And there was obviously, there was a report restriction for a reason. But it's that's the problem. I think sometimes when these allegations come up, it's usually there's someone that's the face of it, but there's always
protections because they're in state employ.
But it was obviously, as you said, a senior officer, but to have a really serious crime, a crime branch of the gardaí raid your house and they had a warrant and all that, it is it's just hard to know what was going on there and what was because obviously it was COVID, so it was a busy time for policing as well.
For sure. There was plenty more to be worried about than a bicycle, a €50 bike that had been left unclaimed.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's it for this week, Eimear. So thank you very much. Hopefully next week we'll be back with our full teams, yeah?
Yeah, we'll have Niall on next week.
All right. Thanks
a million.
Thanks,
Nicola.
If you are already a subscriber to crimeworld.com, you've probably binged on our 6-part deep dive into the life and the rise of the dapper Don Christy Kinahan. From the streets of Dublin to the head of a global cartel, what made and moulded the ambitious Kinahan? And where is he now as he runs from the law? For those of you who haven't joined us yet, here's a short extract from our exclusive series, which is just a click away. So we're going to do a rest here. We're going to start this tome, which is the sort of the life and crimes of Christy Kinahan Sr., who has to be the most fascinating individual in the entire sort of Kinahan cartel set. You know, he is an intriguing character, to say the least.
I think he's the most interesting of all the gangland criminals, really, if you see where he's come from and where he's ended up and how he's managed to navigate through all of those eras of organised crime. An incredible story. If he was involved in another arena of life, he'd be regarded as a kind of heroic businessman. But of course he's not. He's involved in a murderous cartel. But an incredible story.
And there's a little bit of intrigue and mystery to his background, which we're going to go into. Some of it is clear, and other bits, the stories that go around the mix, and you can never, like for example, you know, some people would say he was a heroin addict. I know he did tell the courts at one point that he did, but he did it for a reason. And the reason was he wanted a free education.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting, the heroin addict, and maybe we'll come back to that.
We'll come back to it because that is something that, you know, certainly some people close to him say that was never the case.
Yeah.
And those who are sort of, I suppose, become his enemies in more recent times would definitely say that, like it's a
stick to beat him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's other little bits that are unusual. We'll start and we'll go through as much as we know factually, and then we'll also discuss the rumours. So he's born in 1957. He's 6 years older than Jerry the Monk Hutch, which just gives him a little bit of a, you know, we can see where he is. He's what I would always say was into the bosom of a respectable middle-class family. Now, some intrigue comes with this. His father, to my understanding, was a taxi driver who worked the Gresham rank on Stephen's Green. And that would have been a good job.
That would have been a good job, a well-earning job. Certainly taxis, back in the day when taxis were protected. His father was also at some point registered, or went, I think, on as a dairy farm manager, and also people would say he was involved in kind of street trading. Not, you know, as a lot of people in Dublin would have been over the years, involved in some stalls and selling in that sort of arena. So Christy Kinahan is raised in Cabra, but his birth cert says that he was born in England, in a place called Perryvale, near Ealing, I think, in London. So this is the late 1950s, when at that time in Irish history, we were, you know, there was high unemployment. A huge number of people left Ireland to go to England at times to get work. Many of them returned, but that would have been one of the big points of emigration, where young couples got married and went over there. Certainly Christy Kinahan wasn't raised in England, but he certainly does seem to have lived there at times. He's had connections to Birmingham and that sort of area, maybe all his life. So he's described, I suppose, as having a middle class upbringing.
Well, I suppose the first house that we can look upon that we know he was in as a child, and he was the only boy in a family of 3 girls, Denise, Maria and Sally Ann. The mother appears to run a B&B from what is a generous Edwardian house. Do you know the name of the road?
Charleville Road.
Charleville Road.
So, I mean, yeah, I know it well. I mean, I would have grown up very close to there. I mean, those houses are worth a huge amount of money. Now, like a lot of houses in that area, for example, those big houses on the North Circular Road, which aren't far away, there probably would have been times where you would have picked them up at a bargain price, but it would be at very, very far away from some of the figures we've discussed. For example, the grinding poverty in which Jerry Hutch would have been born into. Certainly Christy Kinahan would have been raised in something that's now worth a huge amount of money, that home. And it's
would they have always been a middle class sort of a home? We're using that term very loosely here. That's part of East Cabra. Yeah.
Right now, if you walk through East Cabra now, you can't. There's organic coffee shops and all of that sort of stuff, and houses being sold for routinely close to $500,000. Like back in the 60s, it wouldn't have been so much like that, I think. And those houses, like a lot of places in sort of Stony Batter or somewhere like that, those houses wouldn't have been seen as posh houses.
Would a taxi driver's wage have bought that house?
Well, it would have. It would have. I mean, it would be far, far bigger than most houses in that area, and would have cost a lot of money. But I suppose it's a different context, and Cabra would have been different then. Christy Kinahan would have been growing up in the 60s, early 70s when he's a teenager, and Cabra at that stage would have been a lot kind of wilder, I suppose. Like a lot of areas, there was a lot of homes built at one stage, and young people grew up, and it certainly would be a far more settled area, just like places like Crumlin and Drimnagh have become far more settled as the time has gone on. So he would have been brought up in an area that I wouldn't describe as being a sort of upper middle class area. He would have been grown up in a working class area, in a big house in a working class area, really.
And it's a big house.
Yeah.
It's an impressive looking house. It always would have been. We do have some suggestion that the family originally lived in St. Teresa's Gardens.
Yeah.
To go from St. Teresa's Gardens to Cabra and to this Edwardian period property is a huge leap.
It is a huge leap, and people would have said to me, for example, that the connection between the Kavanagh and the Kinahan family, for example, has always been a bit.
This is Bomber Kavanagh's parents.
This is Bomber Kavanagh's parents would have known Christy Kinahan's dad. They would have been friendly. All those people have no involvement in crime. There's no suggestion of that, but that it would have been, I suppose, maybe not as straightforward as this is he's a middle class guy. It's somewhere along that line, I suppose. And like most Irish people have, the poverty is only one generation away, I suppose.
Well, he certainly had aspirations, and he was very smart. In school. Though it is said, and it just shows you when somebody gets as big a news story as Christy Kinahan that his leaving cert results have been made public. Do you know that? Didn't know that.
And maybe not made public, but the Sun did a story about how he actually failed his leaving.
Right.
So Christy Kinahan, look, there's no doubt about him being smart, but certainly that was said that he only passed 2 subjects. He would have gone to, it said he went to Declan's in Cabra first and got expelled, and then went to O'Connell's in the North Inner City. Now, O'Connell's Christian Brothers School, probably one of the most famous schools in Dublin. My own father would have gone there. People would have got a scholarship, and it would have seemed to have been a really prestigious school. Past pupils would have included James Joyce, Pat Kenny, the broadcaster, former Taoiseach Sean Lamass, PJ Mara. Also, interestingly, and probably a relative contemporary of Christy Kinahan would have been Tony Gregory would have gone there, who would play a huge prominent role in the anti-drugs marches in the city. So he would have gone. He would have, again, that would have been sort of a prestigious school. But he seems to have not thrived. And then I think we get into a bit of a grey area when he leaves school.
But he excelled, apparently, at sport and at kickboxing.
Yes, and that was a thing that he kept up, I think, through all his life, one way or another. And obviously his sons would have a huge interest in boxing as well.
If you liked what you just heard, go to crimeworld.com now and subscribe for more ad-free listening, exclusive content, and the best crime stories around.